Hi, Keith here with Rebel Civics. Today we're going to talk about interstate secession. We have a guest, Eric Ivers, coming to us from Western Illinois, from Jersey County. He's working towards shifting the Missouri-Illinois state line, moving some of the Illinois western counties to Missouri, trying to get away from the problem of some irreconcilable differences within the state. So Eric worked on filing a vote for a referendum in Jersey County, and there's 4 or 5 other border counties showing interest in doing the same along that same part of the Missouri-Illinois line. So we're going to talk about the practical matter of interstate secession, like getting it to happen, and it being an easier path, an easier sell than full state secession, like actually leaving the union or forming a new state within the union. So, Eric, welcome to Rebel Civics, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I want to start with a little bit of just a minute or two on your background, and then we want to talk about the petition.
I have a bit of an unusual background. Started out in agriculture, then agricultural sales, then moved to recruiting, then moved to ministry, then moved to government, then moved back to ministry, then moved to small business loans, or small personal loans, then to hospitality industry, and then finally retired as the president of a Silicon Valley robotics company. So I've been in government off and on. I've been interested forever, just the way it affects me and those around me. So I decided to take a run at maybe fixing a few things.
All that variety gets you to see the varying aspects of trying to work within the rules of in the United States and in various states, right? You said you lived in a bunch of different states.
Yeah, I lived in several different states. Illinois, born there, Missouri, Indiana, moved to Canada, Ontario, Canada for a while, Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, Colorado, Florida. Just been here and there around the country for the last 50 plus years.
Seeing all those different places and trying to work, trying to like run a business or work within a business in them, you see the rules are astoundingly different. Like the states are not the same, and that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, this is correct. You run into a wide variety of governing styles, but not just the government, but the population itself is different. And oddly enough, there's probably a greater difference between the population of, let's say, Texas and Illinois than there is Ontario, Canada, and Illinois. The government systems are completely different in Ontario and Illinois, but the run-of-the-mill average citizen is very close to the same.
Yeah, people tend to be the same all over. I know I've only lived in 3 states, but the differences are stark. The
Yes.
first 2 were New Jersey. I lived in the Democratic People's Republic of New Jersey, grew up there, worked there, and I lived for 7 years in Washington, D.C. area, Maryland, but right on the border, like pretty much the city. And I I seceded from both of them, and I live in South Florida now, which is I'm still getting used to the cultural differences, but it highlights the differences of the state and why some of these secession movements, to me, the way I see it, like it's obvious. You drive around, like Florida and New Jersey are a lot different in so many different ways.
Yes.
And the same, I don't happen to know much about Illinois, but I've heard about it, and in talking to you just when we first did a quick meet and greet, and then I started reading yesterday and today. Yeah, it's the same problem. Like Illinois is almost a microcosm with like Chicago, and then
Yes.
the 90% of the state that's mostly rural and more conservative, and completely opposite what we hear in the news about Illinois, which is all about Chicago.
It's been interesting. Illinois, the rural area was split pretty much Republican, Democrat, about 50-50 for decades. And then somewhere right around the turn of the century, it started moving, the rural area started moving farther and farther toward the Republican side of the situation, to where now, if you look at the red-blue county maps, Illinois is almost all red, except for Chicago. So geographically, where downstate is much, much bigger than Chicago. However, by population, Chicago outnumbers the rest of the state about 2-1.
Yeah, and there's a lot of counties. It's a big place, and there's very little national level news. Like from Florida, we don't hear much about this. I never heard the downstate term, but now I see it all over what I read today.
And
I have
oddly enough,
just so somebody shows the map of where you're at. Here's the state. So there's a lot of counties.
103, I believe.
103 counties, and Cook County, which is where Chicago is, dominates the state level politics because of the population.
Yes.
Hence the problem. So this is just a map of, and Jersey County, if I got that right. That's where you're at.
If not, it's really close.
Yeah, I see it's in that little crux. So that happens to be on the Missouri line. So
yes,
that's one solution, is just move to Missouri, which is
and that's what I'm looking at. There's been a movement within the state. I think 25 or so counties have voted to see what it takes to secede and become their own state. Have downstate Illinois be its own state. And by the way, the term downstate is kind of amusing because if you go directly west from Chicago, they kind of consider themselves downstate too. Anything that's not Chicago is pretty much downstate. So what we're looking at is the possibility of forming a new state compared to moving state lines to just simply align with a state that is more compatible with the views and the people in the immediately adjacent areas.
So yeah, that's the big question. I want to get into that more later. First, I want to cover the name of the county, but there's a bunch of comments already in here. Obviously, some people are watching that know about this. So the first one was, just make Cook County break off from the rest of the state, give them to Indiana. It's from Rodline.
And the response that I would have, and I have had before, is Indiana doesn't want them. At that point, they would dominate Indiana and turn it into Illinois. Yeah,
so that would be refused. So you couldn't get both state legislatures to agree to that, right?
No, there's just simply no way. It wouldn't be any change for Chicago. They could either dominate the rest of Illinois or they could dominate the rest of Indiana. So there's no advantage to them to go to Indiana. The advantage of them is they already control Illinois and they don't have to build up a downstate network of any kind.
There's another comment here in YouTube. Spidge B, thanks. He says, I live in Indiana, got to push back a bit on Cook County. Yeah, he doesn't want it. He said, I was thinking of pushing Gary, Indiana the other way.
The Chicago metro area includes that chunk of Indiana that's adjacent and tends to be pretty similar. The few counties around there, except they don't have to put up with all the restrictions and rules and laws that Illinois has. So Indiana in that northwest corner gets whatever advantages there are to being part of Chicago metro without the disadvantages.
I saw a quote, I don't know if it's in here, but they were talking about how the vast majority of Indiana, and I think they were talking about Jersey County too, how that has shifted over the last 50, 100 years to being more Republican, conservative, whatever you want to call it, Jeffersonian almost. I mean, it's named after New Jersey, but it looks like it's people that seceded from New Jersey.
Here's what's going on in Illinois. The political attitudes of the people haven't changed. It's always been a conservative part of the state. Anything outside of Chicago has always been conservative. It used to be conservative Democrats. And now, since the Democrat Party has moved so far to the left, people just simply said, okay, I'm going to continue to vote for the same type of people I voted for before. They just happen to be in the other party now.
Like it shifted. Yeah, when the Republican Party formed, it was not what we think of today. And the Democrats are the Southern, that they were all Democrats. They were fighting for independence. Right?
Yes.
At the time, we're talking about 1860s.
Yes. And it's been interesting, though. There have been a few political realignments in the country over the years, and we're probably right in the middle of another one right now. It's awfully hard to see them from the inside. It'll be easier to see looking back in a few more years. But it looks like we're in for a social and political realignment which would also be nice if we got a geographic realignment at the same time.
Here's the quote that I was thinking of. It says, Jersey County's federal political history is fairly typical of the anti-Yankee Southern Illinois counties. It voted solidly Democratic until Warren G. Harding carried the county. But now it's shifted Republican. So yeah, I get this anti-Yankee. I'm a former Yankee. Now I live in Florida, where people argue about whether the war should have been called the War for Southern Independence or the War of Northern Aggression.
Yes. It's surprising what you find out when you move to a different area. Growing up, what I learned about the War of 1812 was that it was between the United States and Great Britain, and that the United States won. What I learned when I moved to Canada is that the war was between the U.S. and Canada won.
The winners write the history books, I guess, and so
Yeah.
Canada thought they won. Yeah, and you get a lot of people say the War of 1812, that was actually the last legitimate war, right? We shouldn't have done any of the ones since then.
Probably not. Probably shouldn't have done that one. But
That
we were
one
kind of
might have been
dragged.
necessary, yeah.
Well, we were dragged into it. We've been dragged into quite a few wars.
Yeah, all the other ones, I would say, World War II was inevitable after World War I, but if we didn't get involved in World War I, and as George Washington advised, leave European squabbles to the Europeans, that one might not have been necessary either.
You're correct.
That's good. Yeah, that would be a topic for another show. We better get back to this secession. So in doing this, I called the show Interstate Secession, and you said okay on the term, but that's not the term you use for this, moving a county from one state to another, right? If it has another term.
I don't have another term for it. It's just simply realigning the borders to make more political sense than what we have now.
Yeah, it's the what some people call, horrible, ludicrous, treasonous, seditionist. We're really just talking about moving a line from like here to over there. You don't need to kill 1 million people for that.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem that we have, truthfully, is that we are two different states. Chicago area and the rest of the state are basically completely different states. And we align, if you go all the way around Illinois, we align better with Iowa, Missouri, Kentucky, and Indiana than we do with Chicago. So it would make great sense to move the lines for all of those states to where you had the Chicago area remaining as Illinois, and the rest of us becoming part of greater Missouri, greater Iowa, greater Kentucky, and greater Indiana.
And it's a common problem. I think I said it earlier, that it's the same problem exists at the national level. When you look at a state, different states and the differences, like the difference between New York and Florida, between, California and Tennessee.
Yes.
There, tremendous differences. New Hampshire, like sitting in this sea of socialist Marxism, and thinking about seceding as the solution, besides the Free State Project people. So anyway, I use the term interstate secession. So I'm using secession as a broader term, which is basically moving the political lines, breaking ties with an entity, political
Right.
entity, and changing the rules. It's basically following what Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence. So to make it clear, I think, well, if I'm going to call this interstate secession, I'm going to use this in the title, then I better have a definition. So I didn't find one, but I made one. So
Okay,
I'm just
good.
curious what you think about this. So I split secession into 3 different types. So I say there's interstate secession, there's new state secession, and then full state secession. And maybe the names could be polished a little. So I defined interstate secession as a portion of a state breaking ties with the state government and joining another state.
Yeah, that's exactly the definition that you need, because that's what that's the only politically feasible way to change Illinois to something that's more beneficial to the population, both of Chicago and downstate.
And as a practical matter, that's passable, in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I don't
You want to
expect
call
it
it
to
that?
happen right away. The ballot initiatives that have been put on, and the one that I would have put on similarly, are not to actually secede, but to study secession, to see what it would take in order to do the things that we need to do. In our case, it would involve the surrounding states because they would have to agree. Some folks from Kentucky have already said they're fine with it. I've talked to one state rep and have feelers out to a couple more in Missouri, and they would be they're interested in looking at it. They didn't say yes, we want to do that, but they said they were very interested in looking at it. I talked to about 3 different Illinois state reps, and they're all interested, but a little fearful of bringing it up because they think it makes them look stupid. And that's one of the nice things about me. I don't really care if things make me look stupid or not. If the idea is not stupid, then it doesn't make any difference how I look.
Yeah, receiving flack is a sign of being over the target.
Mm-hmm.
You will get that. Certainly, doing social media. I mean, this is probably my 5th or 6th episode over the last 6-9 months I've done that focus on succession. Yeah, I expect to get some comments about how stupid I am in the YouTube comments. That's normal. Yeah, it doesn't bother me much.
I've dealt with it
Actually, I usually just have fun with them.
I've dealt with it for years. I used to be a prolific letter to the editor writer, and then was a paid editorialist for the Springfield State Journal, which is the main paper of the state capital in Illinois. So I not only got called idiots and stupid, I had actually one, let's say, not quite as sane as normal gentleman sent me several death threats.
Wow.
I found them amusing. My wife didn't.
Yeah, you have to wonder how serious they are, but they're normally not. But you don't know. Somebody tried to shoot a congressman not all that long ago, right? So,
Yep.
and there's one elephant I was going to get out of the room here so this, what I call interstate secession. I'm going to repeat it again. I'm glad you like the definition. A portion of a state breaking ties with the state government and joining another state. Maybe we say joining another existing state in the U.S. So, just to make it clear, that is constitutional. Article 4, Section 3 says, no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state formed by the junction of 2 or more states or parts of states without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, and as well as of the Congress. And Eric, you started by saying that you're reaching out to Missouri legislators. You need the legislature of Illinois, and then you petition Congress and say, here's what we want to do. That's the process you're thinking, right?
That would be the expected process. It may not go in exactly that order, but you need all 3 to agree.
Mm-hmm.
And you might think that Chicago would be against doing this, but if you live here and read the literature, you'll find out that the Chicago people consider downstate to be a financial drain on them, in that they spend more tax money on us than they collect. So from that perspective, it would be a boon to Chicago to get rid of us.
So there's incentive for both parties to split up.
There really is. There's a couple of things that get in the way. One of them is just purely the power trip. If you don't get to dominate a bunch of people, then you're not happy. But that's only one of the things that gets in the way. The politics of it, and the reason you and I discussed this a little bit before, the idea of forming a new state, yes, it could be done. It has been done. West Virginia became a state a bazillion years ago, but politically, that's just simply not feasible. If you took each of the states where they are looking at secession within the state and forming a new state, each one of those would put 2 new Republican senators in the Senate, and the Democrats simply are not going to accept that. It's just not going to happen. Where in our case, if you put a bunch of Illinois into Missouri, wouldn't change anything. Still have 2 Illinois Democrats. You still have 2 Missouri Republicans. The same with Kentucky. The same with Indiana. Iowa, pretty much the same. So the only one that's where it would be less equitable than that might be Wisconsin, and I hadn't mentioned Wisconsin before, but obviously they're on our northern border. But that could cause some political furor in Wisconsin, and I'm not sure that Wisconsin would ever be okay with doing that. The other 4 states should be quite happy with it.
Yeah, that's good. As in all divorces, all mutually agreed upon divorces, which is most of them, both parties want to do it. Right?
Yes,
There's
and
negotiation involved. You got to decide
yeah,
who gets the couch, but in the end, it's better, right?
yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that are involved. The debt that Illinois has, um, and if you figure on a per citizen basis, then I've got a pretty heavy debt riding on me as my portion of Illinois' overall debt. Any population that left would be leaving the debt behind, but there are certainly ways to address that as well.
Mm-hmm. There's I can't even come close to keeping up with the chat. There's definitely some people that know a lot about that area here. Some of them are funny, but there's a few that are questions related. So one was related to representatives changing, senators, representatives changing. If you're with the counties, with moving counties to Missouri,
there wouldn't be any particular change. We elect Republicans in Illinois. We would elect Republicans in Missouri. There would, of course, be there would have to be a realignment in the number of representatives for each state, but that would be a pretty simple, pretty straightforward process to determine if this congressional district now gets to elect one representative in Illinois, you could have the same congressional district more or less in Missouri and elect one congressional representative. So that I see that as being something of a challenge, but not certainly the biggest challenge.
and it doesn't change the Senate at all, probably.
No, no change in the Senate. The only change that you would really see would be in electoral votes.
One of the objections I read about the idea of a new state, separating it to a new state, is that if with 51st states, there's 2 more senators, you have to get the states to agree and get Congress to agree. If you split off a Republican majority counties and you have a new state that's one, because Illinois is already Democratic because it's dominated by Chicago, you end up with a new state that is likely to elect 2 more Republican senators, there's going to be a lot of pushback, right?
Yeah, almost certain to elect 2 more Republican senators. The same would go with basically any state that's trying to do this. New York's looking at the same type of thing. Oregon's looking at the same type of thing. There are California's looked at splitting into 5 states. There's all kinds of things going on there, almost every one of which would result in more Republican senators. Whereas the Greater Idaho movement, which is Oregon's eastern half or more than half wanting to join Idaho, wouldn't really change anything in terms of the Senate. So moving the state lines is way more politically feasible than making a new state.
Yeah, I can see that as a practical matter. With following the constitutional requirement to get both states involved, legislature to agree and Congress to agree, whatever order that happens in.
Yes.
I want to finish so I did definitions of the other 2, and I'd like to see what you think of them. So yeah, interstate secession, I define that. So new state secession is, say, a portion of a state breaking ties with the state and forming a new U.S. state. That is how there are several states that form that way. That's also constitutional. It's covered by that same Article 4, Section 3 that I read, the new state clause, if you want to call it that. But it requires permission of the state legislature that you're leaving, of one state legislature, and of Congress. So in this case, there'd only be one state legislature that you'd require permission of. Right. To do it constitutionally.
Yeah, and that's a very adequate description of that type of secession.
And I'll just note, of some of the states that form that way, Maine is one, Kentucky is another. West Virginia, sometimes people put it in that group, but West Virginia never got permission from the Virginia legislature. So you need to have a President Lincoln and that first Republican majority Congress that thinks you can kill 1 million people to prevent secession, which I don't think we have right now. So I don't look at West Virginia as a model for this. Even the new state people, you would need to get permission of the state legislature.
Yes.
To do this,
it has to be mutually agreeable, or it'll never work. There's no point even trying if you can't see a path toward mutual agreement. And mutual agreement comes from people thinking they have mutual advantage, that both sides are better off with that end result than they were with the status quo.
mm-hmm.
The trick is to convince people that that's accurate. It is accurate, but to convince people that long-held beliefs are not necessarily still viable, that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. So, and then I separated, just for the same thing for clarity, I separated the third type. I just called it full state secession, although I would entertain better names for it than that. I came up with this one this morning. So full state secession is all of an existing state breaking ties with both the federal government and the other states, just breaking ties with the other states, what the Constitution is, and leaving the Union. So forming an independent country. So I called that full state secession.
And we tried that 100 and some odd years ago, except at one single state. It was a whole bunch of them decided to do that, and that's where your 1 million people being killed came from. I'm definitely against that.
You're opposed to that? Yeah, I'm in favor of all three of these. Well, I'm in favor of people. I'm in favor of self-governance. I'm in favor of the Declaration of Independence. So
Texas has, I believe, a Texas legislator has introduced a bill to secede from the United States. I don't think it'll go very far, but it's
mm-hmm.
there. So, and Texas has probably a better position to do that than any other state, based on the way they were brought into the Union.
Yeah, and Texas has, for a whole bunch of reasons, economically, size-wise, border-wise, current trade, Texas has a lot of reasons. If somebody's interested in that, there's several legislatures. This is from memory, but the Texas bill, I believe, is to go to citizens referendum. So it's not. I don't think it's a bill to secede. It's a bill to take it to the citizens referendum.
Yes, the same as the kind of bill we're looking at. My bill is
mm-hmm.
not a bill to change over to Missouri, or my referendum is only a referendum, and it would instruct the county board to follow through by figuring out exactly what it would take in order to get that done. And I believe that's what Texas is doing, and it's pretty much what Oregon and Idaho have been doing. Idaho has shown a great interest in annexing that part of Oregon. Oregon has not yet shown any interest in letting it go, but that's what we're looking at.
And I'm just going to show the book here, if you see it good, but Daniel Miller's book, Texit, it goes through all of the common arguments, most of them that most people would come up with, about why Texas shouldn't leave the Union or can't leave the Union, or the practical matter of, various things like what do you do with Social Security, what do you do with the military stuff. Daniel Miller does an excellent job laying it out. Like, it's a pretty convincing book. So based on what you said, I'd recommend you read that.
I probably will.
It's a good book. It's a really good book. It answered a bunch of questions I had, a year ago or a year and a half when I first read it, thinking that, no, you can't do that. It cleared it up. I started thinking Florida should leave too. Texas is pretty far along, and New Hampshire is pretty far along. New Hampshire also has, in the current legislative session, there's a bill on the floor to go to referendum again, and they did it last session. It didn't pass, but it's expected to get a lot more votes this time, because it turned out that all the representatives who did vote to put it, full state secession, to leave the Union and form an independent country, a lot of people, they bring up the charge of treason, which is BS. Sedition, treason. It's not treason. Treason is well defined in the Constitution. That's not treason. But there were a lot of charges in mainstream media that the legislators who voted for that would be kicked out or thrown in jail. And it turned out they pretty much all got reelected. Like, it's obvious what the people think. So that emboldened a lot more of the legislators who believed it, but were afraid to vote for that. So it's expected to do better this session. That's New Hampshire. They're
You'll
pretty
see a
far
lot
along.
more of that attitude. It's the fear of retribution, and I won't say what I believe because retribution will happen. And when I found out, well, these guys that did say it, there was no retribution, so now I can go ahead and say what I believe and what actually represents my constituents. So
Mhm.
we're not at a tipping point yet at all, but in order to get to the tipping point, it has to start somewhere, and it has started. Not just here, and I take no credit for starting anything. This movement was going strong before I joined into it.
Yeah. So on the you had brought up Greater Idaho. I just going to show that for a minute. I didn't show it when we first brought it up, but yeah, that's a movement of the same thing. So for people that are not familiar with this intrastate secession, what Eric is doing is not the only one. So this one, Greater Idaho, this is from their website. This is what they're talking about. The red counties there have already voted for the resolution that Eric is working on getting in Illinois, in Jersey County, Illinois. And the green one is about to vote on that. That's considered a critical one because it's the final one that's on the border as far as having one whole block go, which is cleaner. Right? So yeah, I would like to. I'm going to do a show on this one too. So yeah, this Illinois one we're talking about today is not the only one, and there's some others. There have been people in Florida talking about it, and also splitting Florida in two, and the whole state leaving. All three of those options are being discussed.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in Illinois is looking at whole state secession because it just doesn't make any sense. But the two options of forming a new state or joining the states beside us are both under consideration by a lot of people, and have the forming a new state side of it has been voted on in by I think 25 to 30 counties now have voted in favor of it.
Yeah, it's it was 23. Here I have this right here. It's 27 now. So as of the November election, when 3 more voted, there's 27 total.
Yeah, and then there's a portion of another one, the county just south of us, Madison County, a couple of townships voted in favor of it. It wasn't
Yeah,
on the ballot for the whole county, but the two townships that voted did vote for it.
they did it on a township level. That's why that
Yes.
number. So I've seen that number be one different because of
Yeah.
Madison, right? I don't
Yeah.
know if it's 26 or 28 or whatever, but it's around
Yeah.
that.
It's somewhere in there. That 27's about right.
Here's the map of counties that have passed it, and I think this is Edwardsville. So I think this one here is Jersey County, right? If I got that right.
We haven't passed anything yet.
Yeah, it's grayed out here, so it hasn't.
Yeah.
And this is for the resolution to explore. It's a non-binding resolution, so it's
Exactly.
not. It's a baby step, or it's a small step. I won't call it a baby step.
Yeah. And
It's not a
that's what I'm
baby.
after as well.
Yeah, it's for practical reasons. It's a good idea to do that first. And I highlighted this. I was going to read it. This is the resolution that recently passed in a couple, and my understanding from a quick look today is that this is what the other ones passed. They're variations of this non-binding resolution. Shall the board of Brown County correspond with the boards of other counties of Illinois outside of Cook County about the possibility of separating Cook County to form a new state and to seek admission to the union as such, subject to the approval of the people? That was a citizen referendum in Brown County. This was a 2022 November election. 74% of the voters supported that. That's a huge margin.
That's not a surprise at all. Let's say that the changeover from blue to red, if you will, has been ongoing. I was chairman of the Green County Board 20 some years ago, and I was there right on the cusp when the board changed from it was a 7-person board. It changed from 5-2 Democrat to 5-2 Republican with my election, that of a couple of cohorts. And then the next election, it changed to 7-0 Republican. So that was 20 some years ago. This county just hit its first time for Republican county board, and this is a 12 member board. It is now 11-1 Republican.
Wow, that's a major shift in not that much time, right?
No, this happened very rapidly in both cases. And I say it wasn't that people said, "Oh, I don't like the old party. I'm going to be a different kind of person and vote a different way." They're still the same people voting the same way. Just the folks that they want to represent them are now in the other party.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of cases, there was not much change in voter registration. There was just a huge change in votes.
So there's in chat, there's people arguing over whether the new state could survive, or can the city survive without the rural part, or can the rural part survive without the city? How would you? But all these possibilities are in there.
All you got to do is look around at the states as they exist now. There's a lot of rural states that survive quite well. There's a lot of smaller states that survive quite well with large cities. So, I mean, it's already there. It's not a matter of can you survive. Of course we can survive. Both sides can survive quite handily and have demonstrated the fact that they can.
Yeah, the problem, one of the problems with this, I say there's a bunch of problems with that concept, is that people change their behavior when the rules change. So it might look like the cities depending on the rule or the other way around, but that's driven by the political setup and the tax structure and the legislation. If the county moves to another state, or a new state forms, or whatever, if you change the lines and change the political arrangements, people will do things differently. And one of the arguments could be against, like, well, can the city not survive on its own, or can the rural not survive on its own? If they're on their own, they'll do something different. So the rural people, if the 80% of rural Illinois split apart and just say, for discussion's sake, was a new state, or Chicago is a new state. I've seen this movement has a mixture of both. Some people say we'll make Chicago the new state, or we make all of Illinois the new state and Chicago stays Illinois. It actually doesn't matter. It's the same thing. The new state, say the rural people, it does happen to be where all the food is made. So for them, you think they're the ones that won't survive? I would be inclined to vote onto the rural side. It's the cities that can't survive without the rural, not the other way around.
Having lived both in extremely rural areas and very high population centers, yes, I found a long time ago it's much easier for somebody from a rural population to survive in an urban center than it is for somebody from an urban center to survive in a rural population.
I mean, just looking at history, the whole world for, 1 million years back, if you go back all the way to the beginning of mankind's formation, everybody lived rural, right? Of course, because if you have an agrarian culture, that's the only way to survive. Cities are a development of a wealthy, high productivity society that can afford to, pay university professors to sit and argue about gender equity. Like you don't have that in a caveman days, right?
No, struggles for survival preclude struggles for most of everything else.
But I read several articles about people on the Chicago side that counties can't leave, you can't form a new state because Chicago funds rural Illinois. Like, maybe that's true, but it doesn't matter. Things will change. And I would bet on the rural people to survive.
Yes, it's always been that way.
They're the ones growing the food. They're also the ones that have guns.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll side on the people. They have big trucks and they have guns. Or do you want a city that has great theaters and one of the highest crime rates in the country, and some universities and sure, some corporate offices, but there's not a lot of manufacturing. So, what does Chicago do without the rest? So
The interesting thing that you brought to mind for some reason is I read some time ago that probably the either third or fourth largest army in the world is deer hunters in Pennsylvania during deer season.
Deer hunters, yeah. The largest army in the world. Another way to look at the largest army in the world is gun owners in the United States, by far.
Yeah, China has 2.6 million people in their military, and the United States has over 70 million gun owners.
Yeah, 2.6 million. I mean, Florida has almost that many concealed carry permit holders.
Yeah.
That doesn't count the people that don't have a permit to carry.
Right.
Like there's a difference, and a shocking difference to somebody who lived for 40 something years in New Jersey and then 7 in Maryland. Is you sit in a bar and people casually mention they have a pistol on them, like Florida. People say here, I realize right away, people just talk about mass shootings, and they're like, no, a mass shooter in the grocery store in Florida is not going to get very far. Like, that's just silly.
Mass shootings happen. Mass shootings happen in gun-free zones.
Yeah, Broward County, which is super liberal school. Everybody's heard of Parkland. The Pulse nightclub, a place that had gun bans and and equipment detect them. There's where they've happened in Florida. No, they you don't hear about it in the grocery store in Florida. So yeah, I've had a lot of people say, nah, you don't really know. I was watching a video of a New Hampshire. It was a meeting with Free State Project people and a bunch of legislators, and they were trying to convince a liberal Democrat in the state legislature of some policy or something. And for some reason, firearms comes up. And so the guy he's been talking to for an hour, they start talking about guns, like how terrible. And the guy just like lifts up his shirt and he's got a gun sitting there at the table. And the guy's eyes get like huge. What? You brought a gun? And then like 2 or 3 people in the front row go like, I got a gun. And this one woman holds up her purse and said, there's probably a dozen or 2 people here that have a gun on them.
Yeah.
And they said that his eyes got so wide, and he said, we've been here for an hour with all these guns and no one's been shot. And everybody just laughed at him. Like, this is New Hampshire.
The same in Texas.
Yeah, like Texas. Yeah, Texas is pretty good. Texas is pretty good.
Not as good as New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, I don't know if you've ever seen the discussion of like which state has the oldest, they call it constitutional carry, but permitless carry law.
New Hampshire.
You know that. New Hampshire, because they don't have any gun laws and they never did.
Yep.
There aren't any gun laws. The only gun laws are federal. And you don't hear about New Hampshire and, for murder and mayhem in the news every day. Like,
isn't that New Hampshire? Live free or die?
Live free or die. That's what their state motto is. Anyway, yeah, I think I started a chat about this in the chat. So, okay, so I understand what you're saying about the it really is a practical matter, because you will get more objections from the state legislatures if you try to do it constitutionally. If you do a new state and it turns out there's a risk, quote, of 2 more Republican senators that would upset the balance, right?
Yep.
I think the balance would settle out because the way the 2 parties work, I'm not in either party, never have been. And to me, I'm so far into the liberty side that I don't actually distinguish all that much between them. But I know there's differences. I'll take Republican over Democrat for most things. But the way it's always worked in my lifetime is they just kind of float back and forth. It's like you put one in, then you put the other in. And I'm going to try to sum this up. It's like whack-a-mole. It's like, okay, the Republicans did terrible in Congress. We had $4 trillion budget and debt, and now Trump was fun to watch and all. But the backlash from that puts Biden in, and the backlash from Biden, a huge backlash from him. He's senile and crazy, and all the stuff he's doing. He's trying to start World War III, and he wants to ban black scary rifles, and Biden's terrible, right? But a lot of the economic problems came from the Republican Congress, Republican president printing money willy-nilly. using the Federal Reserve, and we're seeing the lag in the effect in the inflation rate. Say, Biden is making it way worse. But the American public, with their like short-term, low information voters with a memory that's like a week long on the news cycle, they're going to look at what's going on and say, "Oh man, well, I'm going to have to. Probably a Republican will win next time." And it just goes back and forth and back and forth, and the government just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
And that's the problem. Summary. The bigger and bigger government.
Mm-hmm. So I see the whole thing. So let's see, what else we're going to talk about. Oh, I wanted to bring up some of the new state secessions. So the three that have happened, as far as whether or not this is constitutional, where a state formed from within part of a state. The first one, Vermont, was recognized by Congress, separated from New York. So it was de facto independent, but New York always claimed it. That was 1791. And Vermont ended up paying $30,000 to New York, and Congress finally recognized it as a state. But Vermont was officially part of New York until then. Kentucky was formed by splitting off from Virginia. So Kentucky seceded from Virginia in 1792. Maine was created by secession from Massachusetts in 1820. And then 1863, West Virginia was created from part of Virginia. So that's 4 states that were created that way, of the 37 that have been admitted to the Union so far. But the last one, this is kind of with your point of, could that happen today? The last time was 1863. That was kind of a while ago. Right? So we're coming up on 2 centuries ago that happened.
The Civil War kind of put an end to a lot of that.
Well, if you want to get into that, I'm going to push back hard on that one, because force doesn't answer moral questions. Might doesn't make right. Lincoln was wrong, and I don't think. My opinion is that Biden, why he's one of the worst presidents in a long time, maybe the worst of my lifetime. I don't know. Probably, I don't know. If he gets World War III going, I would say that.
For sure.
To me, a senile old guy in the White House, I'm not actually opposed to that. If he just sat there and didn't do anything, that would probably be better than any president recently.
But the problem is, then there's some faceless person or persons in the background who are actually doing it anyway. And to me, that makes it worse because there's nobody to pin it on.
And they're doing that regardless. I think actually Trump made that obvious, because Trump talked about all the stuff he wanted to do. Like, Trump couldn't even end a war. He said he would. And I think he actually tried. At least he made noises like he was going to, and he told people to. But the Pentagon just overruled him. CIA overruled him.
Yes, and that shouldn't be able to happen.
No. So I kind of look at, like, if Trump can't do it, he's a pretty bullheaded guy. Just says what he thinks. Like, he wasn't able to do it.
Oh, you got a governor. You got a governor down there who might be able to do it.
Nah, he's DeSantis is what I was sort of talking about, and I did vote for him the first time. Yeah, he's I would call him. He's one of the least worst governors in the U.S. He's pretty good. I don't really oppose him. I wouldn't vote for him for president, but I'm not. He wouldn't be the worst choice by a lot. He might be better than Trump. He's a little more politically smooth.
Yes.
And he's been distancing himself from Trump the last year. It's interesting watching the last governor election, how much he distanced himself from Trump and had an overwhelming victory. It's probably related. But he is sort of on the Trump side. But he's politically smoother in the party. So I would prefer he stay governor of my state, because the governor has more authority, and I care more about the state than.
Yeah, but you get to keep him that way, and I don't.
Yeah, I mean, if there's plenty of people I would pick over him and welcome you to take him. But yeah, he's a possibility.
Yeah, he is.
I hope Dave Smith wins the nomination. I would bother to go to the polls for that.
Who is that?
Dave Smith he's a Mises Caucus guy in the Libertarian Party who has a shot at it. He's really good at calling them out. I wrote in Thomas Massey last time. Like he's
Yeah,
of the
he's
people that are
interesting.
actually going to DC, I would pick him. The time before that, I didn't vote at all. Like it was with the Hillary, Trump, Gary Johnson. Like he wasn't even libertarian. Like if the Libertarian Party ran an actual libertarian, I might bother, but I didn't even go vote. I'm like, this is ridiculous. That's my view. I'm pretty much over trying to fix DC. I'm not convinced DC can be fixed.
It can't as an entity the way it stands now. The only way to fix any of it is shrink the government.
One of the things that I really like that I think is a good outcome of even talking about secession, all three forms, moving state lines, because it's a clear way of saying that we see a serious problem here and we can't fix it in our state government. We want to join Missouri. That's what you're doing.
Yep.
The next step, forming a new state from within, which is this the new Illinois movement that 27 states have voted to consider, to get their counties to consider. It's the same message to DC. Like, we see a huge problem here. We don't like what's going on. We're going to form a new state as a solution. And then the third one is an even stronger message, is that we give up. We're walking away. We're leaving the union. All three of those put DC and state legislatures, all 50 of them, on notice that the people are going to stand up if it goes too bad. So I support all of them and all the other variations.
The political realignment is real. It is happening. The cultural realignment is happening right along with it. Now we're just waiting to see if there's going to be a geographic realignment.
El Valcaro says, none of the ways to fix DC are nice. No. They range from an open tax revolt to use of a W-88. I don't know what a W-88 is, but I know enough about El Valcaro to take a guess. Do you know? You have to tell me, El Valcaro, what is a W-88? It's probably bigger than an AR-15.
The American thermonuclear warhead.
Oh, okay. So it's an interesting question. I don't want to go too far down the path, but does the Second Amendment cover W-88? I think it's arguable both ways. That's a fun one. If you want to just go to the crux of the matter, Joe Biden's push to ban the so-called assault weapon.
Yeah.
Which I have a definition of that one too. Basically a black semi-automatic rifle that visually appears similar to rifles used in the military and in Hollywood movies, that scares the bejesus out of people that don't know anything about firearms.
Correct.
It's my definition of what Biden wants to ban. And every time they try to write down what that thing is, it doesn't work.
Yeah, they did the ban before, and it was the characteristics of the weapons that they banned were just stupid.
Yeah.
The same rifle with wooden stock that had exactly the same mechanical characteristics wasn't banned. The scary looking black one was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I lived in New Jersey at the time that I think when the 10-year, the original one, Nancy Pelosi, and they put through, which did nothing about crime statistics. That's why they ended up letting it sunset, because no one could argue that it did anything.
Right.
All that happened is the manufacturers had to spend the money, come out with New Jersey compliant rifles. Yeah, you got to make them brown, black. Is it because they're black? I just wonder.
That's discrimination, isn't it? That's illegal.
I think it's discrimination. You can't have a folding stock, and you can't have certain rails. And
black rifles matter.
Yeah, black rifles matter. Yeah, I have a shirt from the guy in Philadelphia started the Black Guns Matter. Maj Touré. And I'm from the Philadelphia area. I donated to his campaign. I thought Maj getting on Philadelphia City Council would have shaken up a lot of people. I would love to see that. But yeah, I have one of his Black Guns Matter shirt. It has a picture of a black AR-15, says Black Guns Matter. It's so funny to see from somebody who's very familiar with Philadelphia, South Philly and West Philly, and to see like an obvious Philadelphia guy that grew up in the hood, walking around with a shirt like that, just like calling them out, like, and educating people on firearm use. And He's going to speak at PorkFest this year, so I'm looking forward to seeing him in person give a talk. Yeah, black guns matter. So is it because they're black? And that's if you want to bring up the one difference, we touched on it earlier, but between Chicago and the rest of Illinois, firearm rules, right?
Oh yeah,
totally different.
Yeah, Illinois is one of the last ones to be forced to do conceal and carry permits. It was extremely difficult to get a conceal and carry permit here until just a few years ago.
And now it's now it's not hard.
Now it's easy.
Now it's
you got a 10-hour course, and all you got to do is pass that and be able to hit a target, and you get a conceal and carry permit.
Wow, 10 hours. Well, I hope you can get that down. Florida has a pretty strong movement. It's a bill the legislature is working through right now to vote on to remove the concealed carry permit.
Yeah, it looks like Florida's going to be the next one. I think there's 25 or 6 states now that have basically constitutional carry.
Yeah, permitless.
Yeah,
I've been using the term permitless carry. One of the things about I asked you a question on that since we're talking about it. There's a lot of people in that movement that are pushing for the open carry and claim that without open carry, you can't call it constitutional carry. And I've been arguing with people like, don't push that too hard. I think permitless carry should go through. If you combine the two so that open carry is also part of it, it might fail. Both might fail.
Yeah, constitutional carry is the correct term and the correct way to do it, because that's what the Second Amendment says. It doesn't say you have to conceal it, but it's going to take a long time education movement to make people understand that conceal and carry and open carry are both equally protected. Now, the court can change it in a minute.
Well, the court can offer an opinion. We don't have to pay attention to it, especially if it's a federal court. I want to read a couple comments. G-Man says, all weapons are assault weapons. It's a good way to look at it. A hammer is an assault weapon, right? There's a great meme I saw today. It said, a liberal's guide to assault weapons, and had 25 different things, from an AR-15 to a hammer to a nail gun to and they all said AR-15, AR-15, AR-15.
If you look up at the stats, you'll find that there are more people killed by fists, feet, and such like than there are by rifles.
Yeah, I mean
that's an interesting stat, and it's real.
Yeah, El Valcura says, I already have constitutional open carry. Concealed is permitted, as shall issue here, by prefer to carry concealed. I agree, in a place where very few people are open carrying. And I've spent a bit of time in New Hampshire where you can open carry, but I would still conceal carry because very few people are open carrying. But once you see a place where people are open carrying, I've been in parts of Texas where a lot of people are doing that. And at PorkFest, it's basically not in the United States, open carry the whole time. And quarter of the people there are. It's fine.
Conceal and carry is more effective, though, because that way, if it's all open carry, then you know who has a gun. If it's conceal and carry, it might be everybody.
Yeah, I like both.
I do too.
People that want to open carry are welcome to do so, and in an environment where some people are open carrying and everybody can open or conceal if they're an adult and not a felon, then a criminal is going to assume that the ones that are open carrying are not the only ones. I think that's what anybody with an IQ above that of a brick that's a criminal is going to think. This is not a good place, right? So
Florida had that happen when they first did their when they expanded their conceal and carry. The attacks on the armed attacks or the physical attacks on people dropped tremendously, and carjacking slowed down, except around airports. Because if you're in a rental car, you probably don't have a gun.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody last week that I ran into that stopped the carjacking by reaching into a pocket and beginning to pull out. He didn't have to fully draw. 3 punks were he said it was no question they were going to take his car, whatever it took.
Yes.
And he was by himself in a very dark area with a decent car. But they were watching him. As soon as he just had like his hand in his pocket and start to pull it out, they bolted.
Sure. They don't want to get shot. There are easier people to carjack.
Yeah. Here's another comment from G-Man. Private nuke ownership is constitutional. If they want to change it, you need an amendment.
Yes, that's like owning a cannon.
Yeah.
Owning a cannon was completely constitutional when this was passed, when the amendment was passed, because they were privateers. They had their own boats with their own cannons, and our government sanctioned them going after our enemies on the open seas. So they had their own cannons, and it was accepted and a normal thing.
Yeah, and the state government gave them, the what do they call it? The letter of writ,
letter of marque.
Letter of marque.
Yeah.
To actually they could capture foreign forces and bring them in and all sorts of things. Yeah, and Gene Ellis.
They get to keep all the stuff they took too.
Yeah, they had asset forfeiture, writ of marque for asset forfeiture. Gene Ellis said, wasn't that question answered when someone asked if they could put a cannon on their boat? That's the point you just made. Yeah, she said that earlier. El Vacara says, the attempted bugging I experienced ended instantly when my hand went to the pistol under my shirt. Dude was covered with gang tats and scars from having been held down and burned with cigs.
Yeah.
But he said it ended instantly. So, yeah. Now in Chicago, it's mostly the criminals that are armed, right? That's
and mostly all the killings you read about Chicago are the criminals shooting each other.
Yeah, and even though I don't want it to end that way, I guess I would say, especially if they haven't had a chance to breed yet, let them take each other out.
And it's a shame. And there are root causes of that problem as well. And they could be cured. Matter of fact, they were being cured, and then racism jumped back up in full public view, and that's been bad for the black family ever since. Mm-hmm. The black family was probably more conservative than the white family 50 years ago, but not so much now.
Yeah, the stats on the number of black children growing up in two-parent households in the 40s, 50s was about the same as whites. I think an interesting stat is like in 18. I'm making up the numbers because I don't remember exactly, so don't quote me. But like 1850, South Carolina had a higher rate of black children growing up in two-parent households than now. Like that's an astounding, and that was like in the peak of slavery, and includes slaves, and it's worse now. And single-parent households are the number one statistical factor.
You can break that down a little bit further. What you'll find out, if you want to look into it, you'll find very interesting. It's not single-parent, because if they're raised by the father and with no mother, then they don't have the same results. People raised in a two-parent family or a one-parent father-only family are about the same.
Wow, no, I didn't know that, and also I hope
found out recently.
I hope we don't get our channel banned from YouTube for bringing that fact up. That doesn't sound like one you're allowed to say.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to screw up your life.
That's okay. We're mostly promoting Rumble now, even though I like YouTube because I can see people chatting. So I actually encourage people to use YouTube. But everybody's listening that's listened before has probably heard me mention it or listens regularly. Like we're kind of ready for this. Yeah. Some of our advertising revenue that kind of keeps the servers going comes from YouTube. We occasionally have shows that they restrict advertising. So there's like a mild thing they do, which is they ban the ads. Screws them too, I think, but they're sending a message.
It does, but to a small extent.
And we've
hurts you
had
a lot more.
strikes. We've had strikes. We've several times gone through months and months where you had 2 strikes. If we got a third one, they would ban the channel. So like, we're kind of careful. A lot of that came from during the COVID times. So you had to be careful on YouTube what you said about COVID. So we had episodes that we just didn't put on YouTube. You can put them on Facebook. You can go on Rumble and Odyssey and BitChute and DLive and Apple Podcasts, but be careful. You have to be more careful with YouTube. I don't know that secession, and the way I talk about it is educational. Rebel Civics is an educational channel. We haven't even mentioned it, but nothing we had said has anything to do with initiating any sort of violence at all. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't self-defense. We've talked about firearms as self-defense, and it includes self-defense from the government, which is the reason for the Second Amendment.
Yes.
So yeah, I think, as El Vaccaro or G-Man said, yeah, nuclear weapons are an interesting topic for covered by Second Amendment. But as Joe Biden pointed out, if you want to go up against the government, you need an F-16. It's one place I agree with Joe Biden on. If anybody in Florida wants to go in partners on an F-16, I would love to upgrade my private pilot license to F-16, but I can't afford to fuel myself. I had to abandon my old Piper when my partnership ended. It's an expensive thing, I'm sure, to keep an F-16 flying. So you need a group, right? That's what you need a militia for. But
yes,
and you're not parking in your driveway, and you need an airport bigger than most county regional airports. But yeah, I consider F-16 within the scope of the Second Amendment.
Most people don't.
Now you can do the more conservative. I usually do the almost always in any kind of a debate with somebody that doesn't just kind of nod their head like you did. I'll back up to saying, well, arms, use like the Blackstone legal dictionary definition of arms, which is anything a man can carry or useth in wrath against another. That's what an arms is. That's the most prominent legal dictionary that was available in 1781 when they were writing this. That's the definition, the most likely definition the founders used. And you read them, like you brought up cannons. Cannons are certainly covered. Every kind of firearm that you could carry is covered. So yeah, automatic weapons that's almost a trivial debate to me, whether is the 1934 Firearm Act unconstitutional. Of course it is.
Yes.
That one's almost silly. That's why I prefer to talk about F-16s and nuclear weapons, even more fun. Is that covered? Because the other ones are trivial to me, essentially trivial. Of course they're covered. But anyway, what do you think of that? That's the way I put that. Say, well, here's the definition of what arms meant.
Again, I don't disagree with the definition. The fact that you should be able to carry them, that's bearing arms, but you can bear arms on a boat, on a ship. That's where the cannons came in. They were bearing arms on that ship. If you got something that can carry it, then you're bearing it. So if you got an F-16, it's bearing its own arms. If you got a nuclear weapon and you can put it on an airplane, then it bears your bearing arms. So I don't expect any of that to pass. I don't expect any of that to be accepted by the courts. But the courts have been wrong many, many times in the past, and both sides would agree that the courts have been wrong many times in the past.
Yeah, Supreme Court is often wrong. I don't have the stats, but I find it interesting and valuable to read the dissenting opinions. Often they're the correct one constitutionally.
The Supreme Court arrogated the power to be the final arbiter on what's constitutional and what's not to itself a long, long time ago. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Supreme Court is supreme in terms of what's constitutional and what's not. But we as a nation have decided to accept that they are. Okay, that can change any given day.
Most of the cases, or a high percentage of the cases, I'll take back the most, but a large number of the cases the Supreme Court takes, they don't have jurisdiction over. There's no legal authority for them to even take the case. So their opinion and what they issue is an opinion. I often will push back on my show. If somebody says the Supreme Court ruled, I'll be like, no, they don't create rules. They're not a king. They issue opinions, majority and dissenting. The Supreme Court never says that we rule. Like, they know
Yeah.
what their authority is. Their authority is to offer an opinion on a case that's presented to them. It only applies to that case. And if a state level entity says that's unconstitutional, it doesn't matter. If a county sheriff says that a Supreme Court opinion is unconstitutional, then the sheriff can void it in that county. And if an ATF person comes around, the sheriff, if he's got guts, he arrests the ATF agent and put him in jail and try him under state court.
Yep.
That's how I
never
look
works.
at it.
Never works that way, but it could.
Occasionally it does. There's
Yeah, very occasionally.
very occasionally you see a sheriff standing up to it. But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't want to test the sheriff of my county, but he's pretty good. He's
We've
pretty
got a good sheriff. We've had a string of good sheriffs, but in rural Illinois, you'll find a lot of good sheriffs.
I think that's true in most of the U.S. You get into the rural parts, you get a sheriff that will stand up. Yeah, I know heard the story of one of the example I know, a guy that had diagnosed with PTSD. He was using medical marijuana for PTSD, Afghan or Iraq vet or something, in some rural part of, I think it was Montana, but don't quote me on the state, Idaho, one of those. The state was providing information on medical marijuana patients to the federal government. So the ATF or FBI, they're going to confiscate his guns. They send a letter to him. You're not allowed to have a firearm because you're a medical marijuana patient. He tells the sheriff, and the sheriff says, "No, this is my county. You have a right under our state constitution and the Second Amendment to have a firearm." Doesn't say anything about medical marijuana. And medical marijuana is legal in our state, so you're allowed to have that. So no, he can't. So the ATF guys, they told the guy when they were coming to get his guns because he refused to turn them in. So they show up, 4 of them in a big black SUV from Washington, and the sheriff's there with like half a dozen deputies, and they all get up off the porch and just stand in front and say, no, you're not taking guns. So that this turns into this huge argument. And the ATF guys, of course, they come from DC. We're the big men, right? We're the supreme law of the land. The sheriff says, we'll stop you by whatever means necessary. So they go back to the car. They call their boss. He tells them, no way. You're from the federal government. Go tell him. So they go back and tell him. And the sheriff just draws his gun. Says, no. What I'm the higher law authority here. This is the state. This is my county. I'm the sheriff. This is unconstitutional. So they go back to the car. They call again. So that guy calls his boss, and it took about an hour or so. It got up to the attorney general of the U.S. And then the attorney general said, the sheriff's right, but don't tell anybody. And the word came back down, and the boss calls the 4 guys in their car, and they get back in the car and leave, and they never tried again in that county.
There's a sheriff somewhere in the southeast, and I don't remember which state, that said if they decide that it's illegal for people to possess arms, he's simply going to deputize every male in the county.
Oh, that's a good one. You make every male a sheriff's deputy.
Yeah, and then they could all be armed at that point.
They can all be armed. They all have the authority to be armed.
So I thought that was a very interesting approach.
Yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't heard that one before. Elvac Harris says 90% of the federal government is unconstitutional. I'll debate you on that one, Elvac Harris. I think it's above 90.
I do too.
But I don't know for sure. That's an interesting stat. If you're rounding off,
interstate commerce clause and the 9th and 10th Amendments say that most of the stuff they do is unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm. I will do a caveat because I think Elvac Harris actually knows. I'm familiar with him. He's a frequent unsafe space viewer. If you're rounding off to the decimal numbers, 10, 20, 30, 40, then I think I would agree with you because it's not 100. I would tend to round off to 100 if you counted, but if you're saying you're saying there is something, right? Maybe it's 99 or 98 but I'd just be guessing.
Yeah.
I think it's over 90 though. I do think it's over 90. But if you round off to the nearest, whatever you call it, quintesimal, I'll go with 90.
Nearest quintile.
Quintile. Thanks,
Yeah.
sir.
No problem.
Gene says, "Yay for the sheriffs." And somebody asked for your link to that story. That's a good one. I'll have to go to find that. I think it was Montana or Idaho. I heard it originally on a Chrisanne Hall show, who's pretty good. She teaches classes about sheriffs. So I was taking a class of hers. That's where I heard that story. But I don't remember the state or the county. Elvac Harris says, "Yep, I'm rounding." How about this? Here's a good proposal from Elvac Harris. He said, "How about this? Let's get rid of 90% of it and then discuss which of the rest acts." Good start. I'll call that a good start.
I'm looking at a news place from 2020. A Florida sheriff said he will deputize lawful gun owners that consider violently protesting in his county.
Yeah, that's a good one. Do you want to you send me that? If you email me that link, I'll put it up.
Okay, well, and you can chase it down further if you want to. And then there's a Virginia sheriff said the same thing, would deputize thousands. So I'll send you a couple of links.
Okay, that's good. And I'll look for the one with the sheriff that actually chased the ATF guys out. Well, I'll see if I find that story.
Okay.
Anyway, so I think we covered pretty much everything I wanted to do, and I wanted to kind of close with where all this comes from, which is, as ultimately we're talking about the right of self-governance, which is what the Declaration of Independence says, right? That people have the right to alter or abolish their government. You're talking about altering it in a minor way, what I would consider a minor way. I would think any sane person should consider this a minor way to move the state line between Missouri and Illinois around one county. A county is a convenient assembly group. It's defined. It has a line. There's a county government. There's you can do a county referendum. It's a good size unit, you know.
Yep.
So yeah, do you want to just talk about that for a second? I got your link. I'll pop that up while you're talking. So yeah, that what I'm going to do is I'm going back to the Declaration of Independence, the Thomas Jefferson statement that when any government doesn't serve their interests, which is the right to pursue life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. And that's what we're talking about.
That's I can't possibly disagree with that, but I will get myself in all kinds of shit if I push agreeing with it. So I'll just let that one go.
Yeah, I often will just say when people push back, say, well, you're not really disagreeing with me. You're disagreeing with Thomas Jefferson, and you're disagreeing with the Declaration of Independence, which was signed by the representatives of all 13 states and sent to the king in 1776. They said that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to themselves seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's what you're arguing with.
I would hope that would be peaceful as opposed to armed, and it could be.
When a long train of abuses and usurpations, pushing invariably under the same object to evince a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. If you disagree with that, for people, and a large number of people do, a lot of people in DC, I would just make the point that, well, you would have been on the side of the king in 1776. Yes. Like, and that's what you're saying.
And they're on the side of the king now. We just don't call him king anymore.
The Declaration, historian Brian McClanahan clued me in on this. people often talk about the Declaration as a founding document. Like, no, the Declaration is a secession document.
Yes.
It's a secessionist document. It's a secession document. It's not a founding document.
No.
And it's 13 separate states independently seceding from their central government. And they did it at the same time. They announced to the world at the same time, but a bunch of them had already left. Virginia seceded from England in, I think, March or something. It was months before that. So did one of the Carolinas. I think Massachusetts left before. The Declaration of Independence was just a public announcement, and it was the remaining 13 that hadn't already declared themselves independent, announcing to the king and the world that they were doing it and why. And I'll bring up the point, same thing related to that as far as the authority of a state. When the Treaty of Paris was signed, that's 13 separate treaties. There was no United States at the end of the War for American Independence to sign a treaty. There's 13 separate treaties. So Virginia has a treaty with Great Britain for independence. Still has
at that point, there were essentially 13 countries.
They were 13 separate sovereign states. Yes. They use the word state. The word state, what it means. It says in the Declaration that these 13 states. The Declaration uses plural everywhere. Never uses a singular. These 13 states break all ties with the state of Great Britain.
Yes.
Virginia's a state, Great Britain's a state, France is a state. That's how they use the term. Yes. That's what a state is. So the order of sovereignty in the United States, a little civics lesson. And Eric, I know you don't need this lesson, but I'm just saying, it's the people are the highest authority. The highest sovereign in the United States is the people. The next level sovereignty is the states. The lowest authority is the federal government. That's the order.
The Constitution was not put together to give the federal government authority. It was to limit their authority.
Mm-hmm. And that's I never went through the full state secession definition and the backup from the Constitution, but the federal government is not a party to the Constitution. The Constitution is a compact between the states that created the federal government. It delegated power to it. So the Constitution works by a list of powers that were delegated to the federal government. Delegation is a temporary assignment of a higher authority to the lower authority. So the states, as the higher authority, temporarily assign certain powers. They can take them back whenever they like by their own soul. And the principle of the intrastate secession, let me summarize. Your biggest argument for doing it is that, as a practical matter, it's easier to do.
Yes.
In the current political environment, it would be an easier argument. In 1776, that tactic didn't exist.
Right.
So no, they didn't have that option. Maybe they would have taken it. I don't know. There's no discussion about it that I know of because it didn't exist as an option.
Well, there was no other state, if you will, to become a part of.
Yeah, joining, at the time, Mexico was part of Spain,
right?
And Canada was part of France,
and Louisiana was not independent. It was part of what? Spain.
Louisiana is part of Spain, and then, and there were several, what are provinces now that were already states or provinces. Quebec is one. Nova Scotia, strongly considered joining the United States. Like when the 13 states left Great Britain, there was an offer to Quebec and to Nova Scotia. Do you want to join us? There's an enormous amount of trade between both of those places, even back then, and people back and forth. And my family's from there, actually. My last name's Bassett. It's French Canadian. There's pages and pages and pages of Bassett's in the Quebec City phone book. That they could have been part of the United States. Now, the way Quebec is, I don't think we'd want them. Maybe Chicago would.
They've been an interesting thorn in the side of the rest of Canada for some time now.
Did you lived in Canada, so did you support
Yes.
Quebec independence at the time?
I didn't really care. I was fine with Quebec independence from both sides. I think maybe both sides would have been better off, both Quebec and the rest of Canada. But I was not, I studiously avoided being involved in Canadian politics.
So how long did you live there?
About 3 years.
3 years. So, but it's enough to see and understand it. So,
And I had a pretty good understanding of it before I went, because I'm not going to move to a foreign country blind. But it was an interesting, very, very interesting experience. Our youngest son has dual citizenship.
oh, he was born there?
Yes.
Wow.
He was conceived in the United States and born in Canada.
Oh, there's a good question for the the details matter when you say that you're a natural born?
Yes.
Is conceived, man. Yeah, dual. So he's maintained his dual.
Yeah, neither side has required that he give up the other one.
So
there's no reason not to.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there would be, and there could be advantage of having both. Right?
Sure.
Although the last couple of years, Canada has not been an escape hatch from the tyranny.
No, Canada is getting worse and worse, and I'm actually quite surprised. As I was in the agriculture business when I was there, and of course that meant I talked to a lot of the rural people. I'm surprised that they have allowed this to happen. That we have the young gentleman that's in charge of the place now allowing to stay in charge. Things must have changed there a lot since we left.
The Alberta, British Columbia, there's some secession movements going on there. There's a couple of unsafe space people, listeners that are there that have talked about that. So Alberta's. I've never been to Alberta or British Columbia. I've been to all
both.
You've been to both of them.
Yeah.
They're more like the rural parts of, Alberta's like Montana, right? Or
Alberta is the Texas of Canada.
The Texas of Canada. Okay, there's enough that says it, right?
In terms of oil and everything else, it's that the attitudes are similar.
And so that's where there is a secession movement. That would be interesting to talk to somebody from Alberta.
Yes.
In this series. So this has been great. I'm doing this series and I'm learning about all these different ones. And every time I talk to somebody from a secession, that's promoting secession in their place, which I didn't know very much about, I learn a lot philosophically wise about the whole thing and about both the practical matter question, which is interesting if you want to actually get anything done in your lifetime. That matters a lot. And the the principles behind it. So we talked about both. So that's interesting. I did a show recently with a guy from Brazil, which I didn't know, but there's 3 states in southern Brazil that have had secession movements, and it's the same story. It's the same story.
Yeah.
It's the parallel is obvious, but yeah, there's and they're not super strong, but there's talk. It's an open talk. And yeah, I did an episode on worldwide secession and with somebody from Brazil who's familiar with the Brazil secession movement. So yeah, it's happening in a lot of different states. I was not even aware of the Illinois one until I came across some posts. I don't remember if you were the first one, but this was interesting. So do you have any final thoughts you want to leave?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. It's a matter of are we going to get things done in the near future? No. The idea is to get things started so they can be done a little bit farther down the line. Whether I live to see it or not, I don't know if that'll happen. But I do expect that there will be a geographical realignment, the same as there has been and is being a political realignment.
Something's going to change, right? Something has to change.
Yes.
And I'll pop this up since you sent it to me. I have been just getting it. So and I'll put this link in the show notes if people want to look into this. And the show notes show up when Carter gets to it within a few days, maybe a week, in unsafespace.com. So just go to the Rebel Civics section of unsafespace.com. All the links that I showed that we discussed, and I'll add this one to it, will eventually show up there. So yeah, it happened. I have to look into this, deputy. I wasn't familiar, and Florida's my state. That's a great idea. It's like I want to send that to my sheriff and say, "Hey, man, would you do this?"
We've had nearly all of the sheriffs in the counties who have said that we are a Second Amendment sanctuary county, in that they're trying to, the Chicago machine and the state government are trying to pass laws that require that, well, they passed a law that says that we have to register all of our guns by January of this coming year. And the sheriffs have all said, yeah, okay, whatever you say, but we're not going to enforce that.
You just say we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you got enough guys to send out here to do it yourself. In face of us being against you, give it a shot. But we're not enforcing this for you.
It's possible my sheriff would push. I don't know. He might be a little too politically astute, but an example of them, it's the same kind of pushback. Is there was only one significant setup for a Black Lives Matter Antifa rally, protest, riot in my county when George Floyd was killed, and they were burning down Portland and New York, and what happened is they declared it and announced that it was going to be at a mall. So it is just a good sheriff stories, and we got into sheriffs. It was going to be at the mall, the local mall near me, and they got wind of it. It's going to be a big protest, by far the biggest one. Black Lives Matter and likely Antifa, but it was set up by Black Lives Matter. So what they did is 2 hours before the protest, they shut down the mall, closed all the businesses, set everybody home. I didn't go, but I heard there was over 100 sheriff deputies there, most of whom brought their own car, and a bunch of deputies from the county north, and the sheriff from our county at the appointed time. And there was a couple hundred people there with signs, and they were who knows what they were going to do. He walked up with a dozen or so deputies right behind him, and they knew who the leader was because they promoted it. He walked up to the leader and he said, "Everybody has 5 minutes to leave the property, or you will all be arrested and tried for trespassing."
We had the same type of thing in our little town, small county. Our town's about 8,000, 9,000 people, and we had a supposed demonstration. And I would say that the cops came close to outnumbering the protesters. It was fascinating.
Yeah. So that overwhelming presence, and be quite clear. That's what the report says. He was completely clear. Like,
yeah,
you got 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes, and we're going to start bringing. And he said, we have more than enough people and cars to bring all of you in. And and they all left, and that was it. There was a couple of them apparently walked out to Route 1 and stood there with their signs, and they just let them be. Maybe a few people honked their horns, but you make it clear, like, no, you're not going to burn stores in this county, right? That will not be tolerated. Yep. So the county sheriff, let's just close with that. That's the highest law enforcement officer in the county. There's no one in D.C. that has a higher law enforcement position. There's no three-letter agency. The U.S. Army does not have a higher authority than the county sheriff in the county. And the county sheriff doesn't, the difference between sheriff and the police, the sheriff doesn't answer to the city mayor and council the way the police chief does.
Yes.
I live in an unincorporated area, so it doesn't matter. We only have sheriffs where I live. I live in a seaside, formerly all commercial fishing. Now there's still some, but it's, that's changing. But it's not inside a city limit. So very rarely see a sheriff. If I do, I'm not particularly worried about what a sheriff deputy would do. We don't see them all that often. And it's Florida, where, the statistics of breaking into an occupied home in Florida are like almost nil. Like, that just doesn't happen. Like, there's over 2 million concealed carry permit holders. They don't know how many people in Florida have a gun, but it's, estimates are something like 5 times that number. People that just never bother to get a permit or don't carry, but they have Yeah, and you brought up your class in Florida. It could be a 15-minute class. Demonstrate proficiency with one shot. I prefer more training for uneducated people. I've taken some myself. I've gone through to Florida Armed Security Officer training through that, and I also have the Range Safety Officer one. So it's not hard in Florida to get that, but they're looking at dropping the permit too. So, all right, I won't ramble on about that anymore.
Illinois, we only have about 500,000 concealed carry right now.
It's a new system, right? And you're also in a state that restricted it heavily. So Florida wasn't particularly restrictive even before they had the permit. So it's part of the reason they don't know how many guns. But I've seen various estimates, but it's probably in the 7 to 10 million firearms in civilian, in non-law enforcement hands. So somewhere, who knows? But not counting criminals.
You got 200,000. You said 2 million concealed carry permits.
There's over it was a few years ago. The number crossed 2 million. I don't know what it is now.
And every one of those probably has at least 5 guns. So you probably have at the very least 10 million guns in the hands of those people, and that doesn't count the ones without the permits who also have guns. So you've got a lot of guns there that people aren't really aware of.
Yeah. Statistically, the majority, it's several times minimum the rate of people that own firearms that don't have a concealed carry permit. The number of people who carry without a permit is allegedly high, but that's unknown. Those aren't the people that talk about it, so you can't do a phone survey. Do you conceal carry without a permit? And it's also legal. Florida has a quirk, that you can open carry if you're going fishing.
Oh, that's nice.
So there's one guy who protests the Florida concealed carry permit by walking around with fishing gear and his fishing permit and a tackle box, open carrying, and he's going around the state educating the police.
Yeah, I'm going fishing.
If you have a fishing rod, yeah. My dad gave me a fishing rod. He said, if you want to try that, but I tell him I don't actually know how to fish, and it doesn't have a reel on it, so I don't know if they might notice. I do have a boat, so if you're going out in the boat, it's pretty easy. If you got in a fishing boat, you can open carry. But yeah, so we'll see what happens with the Florida open carry thing. So, and Florida secession.
If you'll keep me informed a little bit of any new interesting things that you come across as you're going through this series, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'll have to put some links out. I'll send you some links to some of the earlier episodes. So yeah,
okay,
I've done
thank
one,
you.
and maybe I'll publish them. So we did one that was a secession roundtable that focused on California. There's several movements in California going on. So the first show I did was on the full state secession of California. Basically, it's Cal exit. They're using some of the same terminology. Then I did another show on a separate California secession movement that is about New California. So that's to divide the state in half with the person who's president of that. They've been calling that Cal Exit 3, and the other one's Cal Exit 2. But I think they need to use better names for marketing purposes. But that one is to take the 22 left majority, progressive majority counties, which is basically the center coast, Sacramento, San Francisco, most of the way to the top and not quite down to San Diego, and split them off as a separate independent country, and then have the rest of California remain in the Union as California or New California. And that new state would be a swing state, which is interesting. So politically, if you do that, the sum of the 22 counties in California that are in this proposal to split into two are 3-1 Democrat voters.
Yes.
So that would be the progressive liberal paradise that they're looking for. And there's, and the California secession movement is actually those people. Mm-hmm. The full state secession is the one they want to take the whole state. There's another movement of people who want to keep their part of California in the Union. So they tend to be conservative, Republican, Christian, flag waver, military in the family. They want to stay in the Union. and that state would be a swing state, which is helpful in this problem of what do the senators and representatives become. It wouldn't be overwhelming majority. The remaining part right now, until people start moving around, would be 1/3 independent, 1/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat, rounding off in that part. So I did a show on that. I'll send you the link and tell other people. Go look for that one.
I'll just go back and start going through all your shows, actually.
Okay. And most of my shows aren't on secession. I do general civics topics.
But you're an interesting person, so I'm sure I'll have other things that I'll find of interest there too.
And this was an interesting conversation. I learned a lot. And you, I think I forgot to mention it, but you were telling me like you're not in a group.
No,
you're worried about your house. Why don't you close with that point of view?
My point of view is I'm sick and tired of being forced into things that I despise by a group of people that are hundreds of miles from me. And what I want to do is move. I want to be a citizen of Missouri, but I don't want to have to move there to do that. I've done that before. I want to move Missouri to me. And in doing that, I would move it for a whole lot of other people at the same time and do us all a world of good. But my primary is I want my house to be in Missouri.
And that's a think locally, act locally. You're talking about your house. I'm worried about my house.
Yes.
And there's a lot of like-minded people in your area.
Correct.
And you, I think you said the number 4 to 5 counties all along that part of.
There are about 5 counties where people in some positions of at least slight power have said they're really interested in doing this too. Mm-hmm. So, and it may be more than that. That's just the ones I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think it's a great point of view, and we spend all this time thinking about nationally. My last 10 years of whatever you want to call my version of activism, writing and talking and doing shows and debating. I went from thinking we could fix DC to working on several congressional campaigns to 2 years with the Convention of States, thinking an amendment would fix it, to working in Florida and thinking the only election I really care about is the school board and the sheriff.
Yes.
And nothing else really matters that much. The state maybe, and DC don't even bother to drive the polls. And now you're like a step past that. I'm going to worry about my house. So that's a good one. I'm going to have to think about that one. We have been recently talking about secession locally here. I live in a 20-unit condo, and I was the president up until last Saturday. And we've been debating whether or not we need to secede and one of the 3 buildings, split that off and move it to Tampa or something. So I want to secede. I want my building to secede from the condo association.
So you go one more step on your 3 steps of secession.
That's another one. Yeah, that's where I'm at now. And now you just hit me over the head with the next step, which I hadn't even thought of, which is my unit. Now, how do I secede in my concrete building unit? Now, one of the owners happens to be a guy who moves large things for a living, like houses. So I asked him, could you move, what would you charge to move building 3 to the west coast of Florida? And he looks at it and he goes, starts like adding up weights in his head. And somebody says, how are you going to move that? It's huge. He goes, we have to bring in a barge. We're on the water. So we'd have to bring in a barge and build a bridge to the barge. Like, no, we do that all the time. So he's like sitting there talking about how to move building 3. So that was a fun conversation with somebody who could actually do it. And somebody brought up, well, there's a couple people in that building I'd like. And he goes, well, how about we just like cut the last 2 units off? We could cut the building there and fix it up, match it. And no problem. That's what you want to do. Okay. Well, there's a secession. So you brought up the next one, and I have to read you G-Man here. He's a regular viewer. He pushed back on you with that house thing, that your house. And what he said is, I don't like being told to do by the people in my own house.
There's only one other person in my house, and she doesn't give me a hard time.
Okay, that's good. All right. So thanks for joining Rebel Civics. That was awesome, and I learned a lot. So I'd like, let's keep the Unsafe Space Rebel Civics people updated on what's happening in Illinois.
All right. And if something changes here that's a matter of any moment at all, I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you next week. Oh, and a little teaser, next week's going to be on Flexit, Florida Secession. So I found somebody that's been involved in the Florida Secession movement for a while. And then I'll go back to some other civics topic. I don't know what I'm going to do the week after that. So.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right. Okay. Thanks, Eric.
This production was made possible through the generous support of our members. To join our community, visit unsafespace.com. Unsafe Space is an online publication for individualists interested in subverting authoritarianism and ushering in the next Enlightenment. For biting analysis and nourishing composition, or to sign up for our weekly news brief, The Abstract, visit unsafespace.com. Thanks for joining us today.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized for distribution on Apple devices. The following co-conspirators are hereby uninvited to Klaus Schwab's Winter Solstice Party. Please be advised that CBS News has paused activity on Unsafe Space while it continues to assess security. Central bank digital currency is a safe and secure way to protect you from Sam Bankman-Fried. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is misinformation. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.